Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a subject that, statistically speaking, is going to resonate with a massive chunk of our listeners. It's about that specific moment in the morning. You know, the one where you swing your legs out of bed, plant your feet, and just kind of wait for the feedback?
The daily damage report.
Exactly. The stiffness, the creaks, that, general resistance to movement. But what we're digging into today isn't just why joints hurt. We're looking at a specific frustration that the source material calls the joint paradox. It's this phenomenon where people are objectively doing everything right, they're active, they eat well, and, crucially, they are religious about taking joint supplements, and yet the stiffness persists.
It's a massive disconnect.
Yeah.
You look at the data, and sales of standard joint supplements are, they're astronomical.
That's right.
We are talking a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's dominated by things like glucosamine and chondroitin. And yet, you look at patient surveys, and they consistently show that satisfaction rates just don't match those sales numbers. People are taking the pills, but they still feel like the Tin Man before he finds the oil can.
That's the core tension we need to resolve today. The sources you've pulled suggest that for the last 30 years, we've been approaching joint health through a very specific and, frankly, an incomplete lens. We've been treating joint issues almost exclusively as a parts problem.
Right. The dominant narrative has been wear and tear. It's a really mechanical view of the body.
Sure.
You think, okay, my cartilage is wearing down like the tread on a tire, so I need to consume things that build cartilage. It's logical. It's linear thinking.
But the sources argue that this linear thinking completely misses the environment where those parts operate. So we're going to explore the shift from a structural approach to what the research calls a multi-pathway or environmental approach. Specifically, we're looking at the breakdown of the standard model, the glucosamine rein, and analyzing the biology behind a newer philosophy, which is illustrated in the text by a protocol called Biodynamix.
And just to frame this correctly, we aren't looking at biodynamics as, a product pitch.
No.
It's a case study in systems biology. It represents a pivot from single-ingredient thinking to targeting the whole ecosystem of the joint capsule.
Okay, so let's start with the status quo, glucosamine. It's the undisputed king of the shelf. If you tell a doctor your knee hurts, they almost reflexively mention it. And looking at the biochemistry in the notes, it's not that glucosamine is like a scam or something. It's not ineffective. It does exactly what it's supposed to do.
Correct. Glucosamine is a precursor. It's a building block for glycosaminoglycans, which are absolutely essential for cartilage formation. The science is solid there.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to support the maintenance of the bricks in the wall, so to speak, glucosamine is a valid tool. It helps slow down degradation.
But here is where the source material identifies the gap. A joint isn't just a wall of bricks. It's a dynamic, moving hinge. The critique in the research is that while glucosamine addresses the solid matter, the cartilage, it completely ignores the physics of movement. It just ignores the friction.
That is the critical distinction. You can have a door with a perfectly solid oak frame and a hinge made of high-grade steel. Structurally, it's 100% sound.
Right.
But if that hinge is dry, if there's no lubrication between the moving parts, that door is going to be incredibly difficult to open. It's going to squeak. It's going to resist.
The door hinge analogy, it's so simple, but it really highlights the flaw in that repair-only mindset. If you have a dry hinge, adding more wood to the door doesn't fix the squeak. And that ties right back to that listener experience of, my x-rays look fine, but I still feel stiff.
Precisely. This is what we call the distinction between pathology and function. You can have an x-ray that shows no major arthritis, which means your cartilage thickness is acceptable. But an x-ray can't show you the coefficient of friction. That doesn't show you how easily those surfaces are sliding against one another. If the environment is dry, the resistance to movement is high, regardless of how pristine the cartilage looks.
So let's get into the biology of that dryness. The hero of this new narrative is synovial fluid. In the reading, it's described almost like a smart material. It's not just water.
Oh, it is far more complex than water.
Yeah.
Synovial fluid is a non-Newtonian fluid. It's a thick, kind of egg-white consistency plasma that fills the joint cavity. Its primary role is friction reduction, but it also acts as a shock absorber. When you stomp your foot, the fluid actually changes viscosity to protect the bone. It's an incredibly sophisticated biological lubricant.
And the main component in doing the heavy lifting there is hyaluronic acid, right?
Yes, hyaluronic acid, along with a protein called lubricin. They work together to coat the cartilage. Think of it like a molecular force field. When the joint is healthy and fully hydrated, The two bone surfaces never actually touch. They literally float on this pressurized film of fluid.
Which brings us to the aging problem. The source material outlines a process that sounded, well, terrifyingly inevitable. It's not just that we produce less fluid, the quality of the fluid itself degrades.
It's a double whammy. First, yes, your body's synthesis of hyaluronic acid slows down. That's standard senescence. But more importantly, the molecular weight of the molecules can change.
What do you mean?
The fluid becomes thinner. It loses that cushioning viscosity. So instead of a thick gel, you have something much closer to water.
And water doesn't handle friction nearly as well as oil.
Exactly. And simultaneously, and this is the part people often miss, the joint capsule itself, the fibrous envelope holding that fluid, it loses its permeability regulation. It becomes less efficient at holding hydration.
The text compared it to a grape turning into a raisin. The tissue itself just dries out and tightens up.
And that tightening is crucial to understand. When the capsule shrinks and loses hydration, it physically restricts the joint. This is the root of that morning stiffness. Overnight, the fluid settles, the tissues cool down and contract. If you are already running on a low oil deficit, that first movement in the morning forces the joint to break through all that static friction.
This explains the invisible pain concept mentioned in the study. I found this fascinating, this idea that cartilage itself has no nerve endings. So when we feel that pain, where is it actually coming from?
That is the million-dollar question. Since cartilage is aneral, no nerves, you can grind it down quite a bit without feeling sharp pain directly in the cartilage. The pain usually comes from the surrounding tissues, the synovium and the capsule.
Yeah.
And those tissues are loaded with nociceptors or pain receptors.
So when the environment is dry and all that friction creates inflammation in the capsule, that's what our brain registers as, my knee hurts.
Precisely. It's the casing that is screaming, not necessarily the gears inside. And that explains why hydration and lubrication can provide so much relief, even if they don't magically regrow the cartilage. You're soothing the tissues that actually have the nerve endings.
This sets the stage for the new school approach. We move from the single-ingredient era, just taking glucosamine, to the multi-pathway era. The source material uses Biodynamix as the model for this. And again, looking at the philosophy, it's a shift from how do we rebuild parts to how do we restore the ecosystem.
It's systems biology applied to mobility. The multi-pathway approach acknowledges that biological problems rarely have single variable solutions. You can't just throw one compound at a complex system and expect optimization. The Biodynamix model outlined in the text targets 4 distinct pillars.
Let's break these down because this is the meat of the deep dive. The first pillar is still cartilage support. We aren't throwing the baby out with the bathwater here.
No, absolutely not. You still need the precursors. You still want to defend the structural integrity of the collagen matrix. So ingredients that support cartilage are still present, but they are just the foundation, not the entire house.
Right. But then we get to pillar 2, joint lubrication. This seems to be the main differentiator. How do you actually re-oil a joint from the inside out?
This typically involves supplementing with forms of hyaluronic acid or other compounds that stimulate synovial production. The goal is to reverse that thinning process we talked about. You want to increase the viscosity of the fluid so it can handle load again. It's about restoring that molecular force field so the bones glide rather than grind.
Then there's pillar 3, hydration. This seemed distinct from lubrication in the text. Lubrication is the fluid, hydration is the tissue.
That's a great way to distinguish them. Lubrication is the oil between the parts. Hydration is the water content within the soft tissues, the capsule, the ligaments, the tendons. When these tissues are hydrated, they are pliable, they can stretch. When they are dehydrated, they become brittle and stiff. A multi-pathway approach seeks to drive water into those tissues, often using electrolytes or specific minerals to manage osmotic pressure within the cells.
Which leads directly to pillar 4, flexibility and range of motion. I think most listeners assume flexibility is just about, stretching or yoga. But the science suggests it's largely chemical.
It is biophysical. If you reduce the coefficient of friction, that's lubrication, and you increase the elasticity of the tissue, that's hydration, the net result is range of motion. The joint physically moves further with less effort.
There was a quote in the source that summarized this perfectly. Modern joint science shows that comfort comes from movement, not just structure.
That's the key takeaway. Think about it. When do you feel your best? It's usually mid-walk or after a warm-up. Motion is lotion, as the saying goes. The goal of this new philosophy isn't to build a static monument of cartilage. It's to create an environment where movement is effortless. Because when you move effortlessly, you move more. And moving more triggers the body to produce more fluid. It's a positive feedback loop.
Conversely, the joint paradox we started with is a negative feedback loop. You feel stiff because of a lack of lubrication, so you move less.
And when you move less, the joint dries out further.
Right, and you take glucosamine to build cartilage, but it doesn't fix the stiffness, so you just stop moving entirely.
Exactly. You become trapped in a cycle of sedimentation. Breaking that cycle requires addressing the fluid dynamics, not just the solid matter.
This perspective really recategorizes the options available to people. I was looking at the chart in the notes, and it basically splits the current landscape into three buckets. Bucket one is painkillers and NSAIDs, acetaminophen.
Which are purely symptomatic management. They inhibit the COX enzymes that signal pain, but they do nothing for the mechanics. In fact, by numbing the feedback loop, they can sometimes encourage you to grind away on a dry joint, which can accelerate the damage.
It's like masking the check engine light.
Totally.
Then bucket two is the traditional supplements, the glucosamine-chondroitin stack.
Which is structural support, good for the long-term preservation of the bricks, but often disappointing for immediate relief of stiffness because it ignores the mortar and the oil.
And bucket three is this joint function category represented by the biodynamics philosophy.
The third way, it focuses on the mechanism of the joint. It asks, is it wet? Is it slick? Is it pliable? It prioritizes the quality of movement over the density of the part. And for the aging population, that is likely the more relevant metric.
I want to circle back to the listener who is sitting there thinking, okay, this makes sense, but how do I know if this is my problem? The source material pointed to dry joint symptoms. We mentioned morning stiffness, but are there other indicators that the issue is lubrication rather than just bone on bone?
Absolutely. Audible joints are a big, one-popping, clicking, grinding noises, even if they aren't sharply painful. That's usually gas bubbles escaping or tissues snapping over dry surfaces.
Interesting.
Another one is the warm-up effect. If you feel terrible for the first 10 minutes of a walk but then feel fine, that is a classic lubrication issue. It takes time for that thick, cold fluid to warm up and spread out. If you were strictly bone on bone with no cartilage, walking would usually get worse the longer you went, not better.
That distinction is incredibly helpful. If it gets better with movement, it's likely a fluid dynamic issue. If it gets worse, it might be structural damage.
Generally speaking, yes. And that's why the multi-pathway approach is gaining traction. It targets that warm-up phase. If you can keep the joint hydrated and lubricated at rest, you don't start every day at a deficit. You don't have to thaw out your knees every morning.
It seems so obvious when you lay it out like this. Why has the industry remained so fixated on the building blocks narrative for so long? Is it just inertia?
Inertia is a big part of it. Glucosamine has massive brand awareness. But also, wear and tear is a very intuitive metaphor. We understand cars. We understand brake pads wearing down.
Right.
The concept of biological hydraulics is a bit more abstract. It requires understanding cells and fluid pressure. But the science is catching up. We are realizing that biology is wet, it's squishy, and it relies on flow.
The source material also makes a point to say that this isn't magic. Biodynamics and similar protocols aren't promising to, grow you a new knee in a week.
No, and that's important. We need to temper expectations. This is nutritional biochemistry, not surgery. It's about changing the inputs to the system over weeks and months. You are trying to rehydrate tissues that have been drying out for decades. It's a quiet science. It's not about a sudden miracle. It's about noticing that you didn't groan when you stood up from the couch today.
It's the absence of the negative.
Exactly. The best joint is the one you don't think about.
So, to synthesize all of this for the listener, if they've been stuck in that joint paradox, taking the pills but still feeling the creak, the takeaway isn't that they've been scammed, it's that they've been solving only half the equation.
They've been maintaining the structure, but neglecting the environment. The actionable advice here is to look at your regimen and ask, what am I doing for hydration? What am I doing for inflammation? And what am I doing for lubrication? If the answer is nothing, then adding a multi-pathway support system could be the missing link.
It shifts the goal from repair to glide.
And glide is what gives you your life back. You don't need knees of steel. You need knees that move.
This leads me to a thought I had while reading the conclusion of the research. We spend so much energy in the anti-aging space fighting things like wrinkles or gray hair, these aesthetic markers of age. But really, listening to this, it feels like mobility is the true metric of youth.
I would agree entirely. You can look young, but if you move like a rusty hinge, you feel old. Conversely, you see people in their 80s who practice Tai Chi or are constantly active. They might have wrinkles, but they move with a fluidity that just reads as youthful.
It really challenges the preservation mindset. We shouldn't be trying to preserve our bodies like museum exhibits, perfectly intact, but behind glass.
Right. A museum exhibit is static. Life is dynamic. I'd argue the goal of longevity science shouldn't be to arrive at the grave with a perfectly preserved skeleton. It should be to arrive there having used your joints through their full range of motion every single day.
Use it or lose it, but with the caveat that you need to keep it oiled if you want to use it.
Exactly. Don't just reinforce the door. Grease the hinge.
That seems like the perfect place to leave it. We've gone from the frustration of the morning creak to the physics of non-Newtonian fluids and landed on a philosophy of fluid movement.
It's a deep dive that hopefully makes your next step a little smoother.
For everyone listening, thanks for trusting us with your time. Hopefully this helps you decode what your body is trying to tell you. Stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Let's stay fluid, everyone.